The Thanksgiving turkey had just reached the table when my daughter-in-law smiled and said, "You didn't cook, so you don't deserve a seat. Eat in the kitchen if you're hungry." My son stood beside her silent, while his in-laws watched me holding the casserole I had made before dawn. I picked up my purse and walked out. They thought they had broken me. By sunrise, 27 missed calls, a frozen account, and one forgotten legal document would make my son beg for answers. Before we dive in, if this story moves you, please drop a comment below. Have you ever been quietly erased from something that should have been yours? Yes or no is enough. What you share might help someone else feel less alone. Quick note: certain details are fictionalized for reflection. The heart of this story, the lesson, is what matters most. Last Thanksgiving. I stood in my son's dining room holding an empty plate while 15 people found their seats, and I realized there were only 14 chairs. I'm Hazel Lancaster, 68 years old, and I've spent 42 years building something that mattered. My husband Conrad and I founded Lancaster Regional Logistics in 1982, back when freight management meant clipboards and CB radios. We grew that company from a single truck route into a regional powerhouse with 43 employees and contracts across 6 states. I ran operations as CEO while Conrad handled the finances, and together we built something we thought would outlast us both. But that Thanksgiving afternoon, standing in my son Curtis's dining room in their renovated Craftsman in suburban Pittsburgh, I wasn't thinking about legacy. I was counting chairs. "Mom, you can sit here," Curtis said, gesturing toward the kitchen doorway. He's 51 now, my only child, tall like his father with my sharp cheekbones. Or at least I'd always thought his eyes were careful like mine. That afternoon, they slid past me like I was wallpaper. Beside him, his wife Ariadne adjusted the centerpiece rust-colored mums and decorative gourds. Ariadne's 48, an estate attorney with perfect posture and a smile that never reaches the eyes. She wore a cashmere sweater the color of champagne. "We're so glad you could make it, Hazel," she said. "Not Mom. Never Mom. Not in 26 years of marriage to my son." The dining room table stretched beneath an antique chandelier set for 14 with Ariadne's wedding china. 14 place settings. 14 chairs. My daughter-in-law's mother, Norma Garrison, held court at the far end, 72 years old, and draped in silk like minor royalty. She'd already claimed the seat opposite Curtis, the matriarch's position I'd occupied every Thanksgiving for 2 decades. Beside her sat her husband Gerald, 75, mostly silent. Others filed in: Curtis's colleagues, Ariadne's brother and his family, all finding seats at that table, none of them mine. "In the kitchen," I said. Ariadne's smile widened. "We thought you'd be more comfortable there. The dining room chairs are antiques, not ideal for extended sitting. The kitchen has that lovely cushioned breakfast nook." I'd stood through 8-hour negotiation sessions with union reps. I'd sat in folding chairs at truck stops, planning routes until 3 in the morning. Extended sitting had never been my problem. But standing there with that empty plate, I understood I was watching something carefully choreographed. Curtis wouldn't meet my eyes. Norma Garrison examined her manicure, and Ariadne kept smiling that professional smile, the one she probably used on clients she was about to bill into oblivion. "Where's your father?" I asked Curtis. He had been gone 6 years, but the question came out of my mouth before I could stop it. Old habit, old grief. Something flickered across his face. "Dad's not here, Mom. He hasn't been for a long time." I know that better than anyone." I said nothing. The kitchen doorway was visible from the dining room, but separate, removed. I'd watch them eat, watch Norma hold court in my place, watch my son carve the turkey while his wife played hostess. I'd be the supporting character tucked away where I wouldn't interfere. I set the empty plate on the sideboard. "Actually," I said, "I think I'll pass on dinner." Ariadne's smile faltered. "Hazel, don't be dramatic. We prepared a place for you." "In the kitchen." "Yes, I heard." I looked at Curtis, willing him to meet my eyes. "When your father explains why he's not here, you can explain why there were 14 chairs." Norma Garrison spoke for the first time, her voice carrying that aristocratic clip she'd cultivated, despite growing up in Erie. "The children simply thought—" "I'm sure they thought very carefully," I said. "That's what makes it worse." I picked up my purse, and Curtis finally moved, stepping toward me. "Mom, please don't—" "Don't what?" "Don't notice. Don't make a scene." I kept my voice quiet. Civil. Never raise your voice. Never let them see you break. "I'm not making a scene, Curtis. I'm simply leaving a dinner I'm apparently not invited to." Ariadne's face had gone carefully blank, her attorney mask. Vernon Prescott, Curtis's business partner, had materialized in the doorway, 63, silver-haired, watching this unfold with the expression of someone calculating damage control. I didn't wait for Curtis to formulate whatever excuse he'd prepared. The front door was 10 feet away. I walked to it with the same measured pace I'd used walking into boardrooms where I was the only woman over 40. I opened it. The November air was sharp and clean. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said to no one in particular. I pulled the door closed with a soft click that seemed louder than any slam. In my car, hands shaking slightly, I tried calling Conrad. Voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. On the third attempt, I didn't bother leaving a message. I drove home to my condo in Shadyside, the place I'd moved to 3 years after Conrad died, smaller and quieter than the house where Curtis grew up, but mine entirely. I let myself in, and the silence was absolute. No football game, no smell of coffee from another person's office. Just the ticking of the grandfather clock Conrad had left me and the settling sounds of an empty home. That's when I saw it, the file cabinet in my study, the one I kept carefully locked, standing open. Someone had been here. And on the kitchen counter, a single envelope with my name written in a hand I didn't immediately recognize. I opened it with hands that had stopped shaking and started going numb. Inside was a single sheet from our joint bank account, the one Curtis's name had been added to years ago for emergency purposes, the one that should have held just over $500,000 from the company, retained earnings I'd deposited after the sale. The balance read $14.23. And beneath it on a plain note card, "We thought you wouldn't notice. We were wrong to think that." No signature, none was needed. I stood in my kitchen holding that bank statement for a long time, Conrad's note in my other hand, before I realized I wasn't surprised. Not really. Because that morning earlier, that same Thanksgiving morning, before I'd driven to Curtis's house, before the 14 chairs, I'd already checked the file cabinet. That morning, I woke at 6:30 like I always did, and I followed the same ritual I'd followed every Thanksgiving for 38 years, even though the man who taught me the recipe had been dead for 6. I brewed coffee at 7 in my orderly kitchen, labeled shelves, filing system, everything in its place. The condo Conrad and I had moved to after selling the house felt too small. Some days, too quiet most days, but the routine held everything together. I measured the coffee grounds precisely 3 level tablespoons, filled the reservoir to the 6-cup line. Conrad had taught me precision. In logistics, he used to say close enough meant cargo on the wrong dock. I put on his watch while the coffee brewed, a Seiko with a leather band, the one he'd given me for our 30th anniversary. The clasp was worn smooth from 15 years of daily wear, and the leather had molded to my wrist. I felt its familiar weight settle against my pulse. "You're the strongest person I know, Hazel." He'd said that anniversary fastening it on my wrist in a restaurant I can't remember the name of now. And the quietest about it. I wear this watch every day, not because I'm sentimental, because it reminds me what quiet strength looks like on a person who earned it. The coffee finished brewing with its familiar gurgle and hiss. I poured a cup, added exactly 1 teaspoon of sugar, no cream. 35 years running a logistics company teaches you one thing: everything has a place, and everything should be in it. My spice rack was alphabetized. My files were color-coded. My life after Conrad's death 6 years ago had become a sequence of controlled, predictable rituals. Conrad had died from cardiac arrest in the driveway while shoveling snow on a February morning that started ordinary and ended with paramedics and a police officer asking me questions I couldn't answer yet. He was 71. We'd been married 38 years. He'd left me the watch, the condo, and a filing system that would have impressed the Library of Congress. You spend 35 years running a company, and your home starts to look like one organized efficient and a little too quiet for its own good. I walked to the kitchen drawer second from the top right side and pulled out the recipe card. Conrad's handwriting, neat block letters on a yellowing index card, sweet potato casserole, brown sugar ½ cup, pecans chopped 1 cup, splash of bourbon, his note said, followed by a small parenthetical, Hazel's rule, generous splash. Conrad made this every Thanksgiving for 32 years. I've made it every Thanksgiving since he died. I set the card on the counter and walked to my home office, the second bedroom converted. The file cabinet sat against the far wall, olive green metal 4 drawers, the kind you see in every office supply catalog. I opened the second drawer and looked inside. Manila folders precisely labeled. Tabs in Conrad's handwriting, mine some in both. I ran my fingers over them without pulling any out. Insurance, deeds, contracts, wills, estate documents. And in the back 3 folders that didn't fit the pattern. I had been checking this cabinet every week for 3 years. Every Saturday morning after coffee before grocery shopping, I'd open the second drawer, confirm the contents, run my fingers over those back 3 folders and close it again. Not reading, just confirming. Everything in its place, everything where it should be. I closed the drawer softly. The mechanism clicked smooth and precise. I still hadn't decided if I was being careful or if I was being prepared. Back in the kitchen, I started the casserole, boiled the sweet potatoes until they were soft enough to mash, drained them in the colander Conrad had bought in 1987 because it had measurement marks on the side. Practical, he'd said. Everything should serve 2 purposes. While I worked, I thought about 1988. Our small office on Industrial Boulevard, 2 trucks parked outside the paint, still fresh on the door, Lancaster Regional Logistics. Conrad had stood at the window looking at those trucks like they were clipper ships. We started with 2 trucks and nothing Hazel. He'd said, his reflection in the glass superimposed over the parking lot. We'll end with everything. Never forget where we came from. 2 trucks became 340. 2 employees became 200. 35 years of careful growth, documented and systematic. Conrad always insisted on documentation. Document everything. He'd told me more than once, usually, while filing something I thought was trivial. Contracts, agreements, loans, gifts, especially in family. Not because you don't trust people, because memory is unreliable. Memory is a soft thing, but paper is hard. Conrad understood that. So when the time came, I wouldn't need to remember. I would just need to read. I mixed the casserole, sweet potatoes, brown sugar, butter, that generous splash of bourbon, topped it with pecans and more brown sugar, slid it into a glass dish, covered it with foil. The smell filled the kitchen, warm and familiar, exactly like every Thanksgiving since 1986. Conrad taught me systems. I taught him ambition. Together we built an empire that sold for $18 million 3 years after his death, and I was about to use everything he taught me. I placed the casserole dish on the passenger seat of my Honda Civic and buckled it in with the seatbelt, Conrad's silly ritual, now mine. The file cabinet sat in my home office with everything in order, waiting. I still hadn't decided if I was being careful or prepared. But by the time I pulled into Curtis's driveway 3 hours later, I would have my answer. The file cabinet would be there when I got home. I knew that. But driving toward Curtis's house with the casserole buckled into the passenger seat, I wasn't thinking about what I'd prepared. I was thinking about what Wanda had said. Wanda Frost, my best friend of 30 years and a retired nurse who'd spent 3 decades spotting trouble before it coded, called me that Thanksgiving morning at 11 o'clock while I was merging onto the parkway. "Do you have an exit plan?" she asked. "No hello, no happy Thanksgiving, just that." "It's Thanksgiving dinner, Wanda," I said, checking my mirrors, "not a hostage negotiation. With that family." Wanda's voice was flat serious. "Same thing. I'm serious, Hazel. Go with an exit strategy, not expectations." I laughed, but she didn't laugh back. The silence on the line lasted 3 seconds too long. "Pack light," she said finally, "and park where you can leave fast." She hung up before I could argue. Wanda had watched the whole thing unfold for 5 years. She'd seen what I'd been trying not to see, that I wasn't losing my place in the family by accident. I was being edited out line by line like a name erased from a draft. It started small. Year 1, 2018. The weekly phone calls from Curtis dropped to bi-weekly, then monthly. When I asked about it, he said he was busy. New client contracts, the twins starting preschool, Ariadne's mother visiting more often. Reasonable explanations that added up to less of me. Year 2, 2019. I wasn't invited to Ariadne's cousin's baby shower, an oversight, Ariadne said, though the invitation list had 47 names, and mine wasn't one of them. The July 4th cookout happened without me. I found out from a photo on Curtis's social media, the whole family gathered around the grill, Conrad front and center holding a beer, Norma beside him, wearing a sun hat like she owned the place. "Oh, Hazel, I'm so sorry," Ariadne had said when I asked. "I thought Conrad told you about the cookout." Conrad swore he'd mentioned it. I had no proof either way. Year 3, 2020. My 65th birthday passed without a call, without a card. 2 days later, Conrad called. "Sorry, Mom," he said, his voice distracted, already moving on to the next thing. "Crazy week. Happy belated birthday." I'd raised him better than belated. Year 4, 2021. I showed up at their house unannounced on a Saturday with pastries from the bakery Curtis used to love as a kid. Ariadne answered the door in yoga clothes, her face arranged in polite surprise. "Hazel, we need boundaries," she said, not moving from the doorway. "You can't just show up unannounced. I need advance notice." Advance notice? To see my own son. If you've ever watched yourself disappear from a family photo 1 year at a time, you know the timeline doesn't matter. It's the pattern. Year 5, 2022. I discovered the group chat by accident. Curtis left his phone on my kitchen counter during a rare visit, and a notification lit up the screen: Brooks Lancaster family. Ariadne's maiden name first. 23 unread messages. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The name told me everything there was a family, and I wasn't in it. Later, I learned the group chat included shared calendars, photos, discussions about the twins' pediatrician, which preschool to choose, whose house for Christmas. Decisions about my grandchildren made in a conversation I'd never see. I drove past the exit for Curtis's neighborhood, circled back, drove past it again. Wanda's voice was still in my head. Exit strategy, not expectations. I parked on the street instead of the driveway, left the engine running for 30 seconds before I turned it off. Small decisions that felt like survival instinct. The dinner happened exactly the way Wanda knew it would. 14 chairs, 15 people, the kitchen doorway, Norma in my seat, Conrad not there at all. I left at 3:15. By 4:30, I was driving home in November darkness. No radio, no call to Wanda yet, though I knew I'd have to tell her she'd been right. Just the hum of the engine and the smell of grease on the passenger seat where the casserole dish had been. The road was dark, November dark, the kind of darkness that settles into the car with you and stays, arriving early and leaving late, smelling like the end of something you can't get back. I could smell the grease stain where the casserole had sat untouched. Brown sugar and bourbon and pecans. Conrad's recipe from 38 years of Thanksgivings that apparently didn't matter anymore. November darkness is different from any other kind. It arrives early and stays late, and it smells like the end of something you can't get back. I pulled into my condo parking lot at 5:07, sat in the car, staring at the steering wheel, my hands still resting at 10 and 2. 5 minutes passed, maybe 10. I wasn't crying. I wasn't planning. I was just sitting with the mathematics of what had just happened. 14 chairs, 5 years of systematic exclusion. 1 missing husband, 1 drained bank account I'd discovered that morning before I left, $528,460, reduced to $14.23 while I was making casserole. The numbers were clean, the pattern was clean, and somewhere in my home office in that file cabinet I'd been checking every week for 3 years, I had documentation that was just as clean. I got out of the car, locked it, walked to my front door with my purse and my coat and the empty casserole dish that smelled like failure. Inside, I hung up my coat, set my purse on the counter next to Conrad's coffee mug from that morning. He'd left it there half full before he'd disappeared to wherever he'd gone instead of Thanksgiving dinner with his family. I sat at my kitchen table in the dark. By morning, Conrad would have 27 missed calls and a frozen bank account. But that night, I just wanted to look at the number 1 more time. The number I'd been checking every week. The number that represented everything they thought I didn't know about. I opened my laptop. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I called Wanda. "You were right about the exit strategy," I said when she answered. "I should have packed one." Silence on the line. Not the surprised kind. The "I told you so" kind that's too polite to say it out loud. "Tell me," she said finally. So I did. 14 chairs, 15 people, the kitchen doorway, Norma Garrison in my seat, Conrad not there. The casserole dish buckled into the passenger seat for the drive home, untouched, smelling like 38 years of tradition that didn't matter anymore. Wanda listened without interrupting. When I finished, the silence stretched for 5 seconds. "You didn't lose a son tonight, Hazel," she said, her voice quiet and precise, the way she used to deliver bad news to families in the ICU. "You lost someone who was borrowing your patience and calling it family." I felt something crack open in my chest, not grief, clarity. "What are you going to do?" Wanda asked. "I don't know yet," I said, looking at the dark windows of my condo, "but I'm about to look at some numbers." "Good," Wanda said. "Call me when you're done looking. Call me when you're ready to do the math." I went inside, hung my coat, set my purse on the counter. The smell of grease and brown sugar still clung to the empty casserole dish. I sat at my kitchen table in the dark and opened my laptop. The Fidelity portal loaded slowly, the login screen glowing blue in the darkness. I entered my credentials, username, and password I'd memorized 15 years ago when I'd opened the account. Joint investment account. My name, primary. Conrad's name, secondary for survivorship purposes only. The balance appeared on the screen, $528,460. Every dollar from my retirement savings, my hospital pension from 35 years as a logistics executive, decades of compound interest and careful planning. Conrad's name was on the account, but he'd never deposited a single dollar. His access was administrative, a legal formality, in case something happened to me. I stared at the number. Not 1 cent of it had bought me a chair. I scrolled down to the account activity. No withdrawals, no transfers. The balance sat there untouched exactly where it should be. But at the bottom of the screen, under account permissions, I saw something that made my stomach drop. View access granted. Ariadne M. Lancaster. Date granted. November 18th, 2021. 2 years ago. I'd given her access when she'd asked about family financial planning estate coordination, making sure everyone was protected. I thought it was about trust, about including her in family matters because she was family. Have you ever looked at a number and realized it was the exact price of your dignity? It was reconnaissance. She'd been watching this account for 2 years, tracking the balance, waiting for the right moment. And tonight, when Conrad didn't show up to Thanksgiving, when the bank statement showed $14 in our joint checking account, I understood what they'd been planning. They'd seen the $528,460. They knew it was there, and they were waiting for me to die so Conrad could inherit it. I closed the laptop. Not tonight. Tonight, I just wanted to look at the number to confirm what I already knew. Tomorrow, I would do the math. I didn't sleep much. By 5:45 Friday morning, I was in my home office with coffee standing in front of the file cabinet I'd checked every Saturday for 3 years. I opened the second drawer. The manila folders were exactly where they should be labeled in my neat block print insurance. Deeds, wills, estate documents. And in the back 3 items I'd placed there years ago and checked weekly ever since. I pulled them out one at a time. First, the joint investment account agreement, original signature pages, my name as primary account holder. Every clause, every provision, every legal protection I'd insisted on when I opened it. Conrad had signed as secondary. His access was revocable at my discretion. Second, a yellow manila envelope, edges softened with age, sealed with red wax that had cracked but never broken. On the front, in my own handwriting from 6 years ago, Lancaster family do not open unless necessary. I'd written that the week after Conrad's cancer scare, the week we'd updated all our estate documents and had the hard conversations about what happened if one of us died first. I'd sealed it myself, placed it in the cabinet, and told myself I'd know when it was necessary. A file cabinet is just a metal box until it becomes an armory. Third, a letter on cream-colored stationery with a Seattle address embossed at the top. Healthcare consulting contract, $218,000 annual salary, full benefits, relocation assistance. Start date, January 15th, 2024. I'd received it 3 weeks ago from a firm that had been courting me for 6 months. I hadn't answered yet. 3 documents, 3 decisions. I set the yellow envelope aside, feeling its weight. The wax seal caught the early morning light, red and unbroken. Inside were documents I'd prepared during the cancer scare powers of attorney property transfers, contingency plans for every scenario I could imagine, including betrayal. I hadn't opened it then because it hadn't been necessary. Conrad had recovered. We'd gone back to normal, but I'd kept checking the cabinet every week, making sure everything was still in order, still ready, still waiting. Some documents are better left sealed until you know exactly what you need them for. I held the envelope in both hands, the paper smooth and cool against my palms. The smell of grease from last night's casserole still clung to my coat hanging in the hallway. 14 chairs, 15 people, $528,460 in an account Ariadne had been watching for 2 years. I set the envelope down carefully and picked up the Seattle contract instead. I knew what it meant, and I knew who to call about the account. At 6:15 Friday morning, I picked up my phone and called Daniel Cooper. "I need to place a hold on the joint investment account," I said when he answered. "Effective immediately." Daniel Cooper had been my financial advisor for 12 years, handled my retirement account since I sold the company, and knew better than to ask questions when I used that particular tone of voice at 6:15 in the morning. But he asked anyway. "Hazel, are you sure?" His voice was careful, professional. "That account funds Conrad's mortgage autopay. The payment processes on the 1st of each month. That's $3,400, I said. "I know exactly what it funds, every dollar, every month for 5 years. Silence on the line. I could hear him typing. "I need verbal confirmation," he said finally. "You understand, this will prevent all transactions from the account, including scheduled payments." "I understand." And you're requesting this as the primary account holder. I am. More typing. The sound of keys clicking, authorizations, processing systems updating in real time. Hold order executed, Daniel said. Confirmation code 7729 Alpha. Effective immediately. You'll receive written confirmation within 24 hours. 4 minutes. That's how long it took to collapse the foundation Conrad had been standing on for 5 years. Thank you, Daniel, I said. Hazel, he said, hesitating. If there's anything else you need, I'll call you Monday, I said, and hung up. I set the phone down on the kitchen table next to the Seattle contract and checked the time. 6:19. I opened my laptop and pulled up the email I'd been staring at for 3 weeks. Subject line, Healthcare Logistics Consulting Position, Formal Offer. From a national firm headquartered in Seattle courting me since September, offering exactly the kind of work I'd spent 35 years perfecting. $218,000 annual salary, full benefits, relocation assistance. Start date January 15th, 2024. I clicked reply and typed 3 lines. I accept the position. Start date January 15th, 2024 confirmed. I will relocate to Seattle by January 10th. Thank you for this opportunity. I read it twice, added my signature block, moved the cursor to send. If you've ever made a decision that changed everything in under 10 minutes, you know it's not the decision that's fast. It's that you've been thinking about it for weeks. I'd received this offer 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of wondering if I could leave my grandchildren, if I could start over at 68, if walking away made me a quitter or a coward. Thanksgiving had answered every question. I hit send at 6:24. 2 decisions, 9 minutes. One life dismantled, another one started. I made fresh coffee and sat at the table watching the sun come up over the neighborhood, knowing exactly what was happening 3 miles away in Conrad's bedroom. I'd blocked Curtis's number at 6:30, then Ariadne's, then the house landline I'd helped them pick out 2 years ago when Ariadne said it was more professional for Curtis's consulting work. But I knew the calls were coming anyway. I knew because Daniel would call Curtis by 7 to inform him of the hold. I knew because the bank's automated system would send alerts when the mortgage autopay failed its test run. I knew because Ariadne checked that Fidelity account every morning at 6:45. I'd watched the access logs for 2 years. By 7:15, Conrad's phone would be vibrating nonstop. I imagined him waking up, reaching for his phone, seeing the screen packed with notifications. The bank, Daniel, Ariadne calling from downstairs, Norma, probably her aristocratic panic starting before sunrise. 27 missed calls by the time I finished my second cup of coffee. I didn't need to see his phone to know. I'd done the math. 27 missed calls is not a number, it's a roster. It's a list of everyone who needed something from you and no one who loved you. Not one of those calls would start with an apology. Not one would say the words that might have stopped this. Mom, I'm sorry, we were wrong. Please come home for Christmas and we'll fix this. They'd say other things. They'd demand I call back. They'd ask what I thought I was doing. They'd threaten, negotiate, calculate. But they wouldn't apologize. I knew because I'd raised Conrad better than this, which meant someone else had taught him to be worse. At 7:30, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it. Mom, it's Ariadne. Call Conrad immediately. There's been a mistake with the account. Not a mistake, a decision. I deleted it and poured a third cup of coffee. At 8:15, Daniel called back. Hazel, I've had 3 calls from Conrad and 2 from someone named Ariadne, he said, his voice strained. They're asking me to reverse the hold. Can they? I asked. No, he said. You're the primary account holder. Only you can modify the restriction. Good, I said. Don't return their calls. Refer them to my attorney if they call again. You have an attorney? I will by Monday, I said. I hung up and stared at my phone, watching the blocked call notifications pile up. Conrad. Ariadne. Conrad again. Unknown number, probably Norma. Curtis finally at 8:47. I let them all go to the voicemail I'd changed at 6:25, the new message redirecting all financial matters to Daniel Cooper and everything else to silence. Somewhere in that house 3 miles away, Ariadne was staring at her phone screen at the Fidelity app she'd been monitoring for 2 years. She'd see the balance, $528,460, exactly what it had been yesterday. She'd see the status hold placed by primary account holder. The money was still there. I hadn't moved it, hadn't transferred it, hadn't emptied the account into offshore accounts or revenge spending. I'd just locked the door and kept the only key. Ariadne would tell Conrad I was bluffing. Give her 2 weeks, she'd say. She'll calm down. She needs us more than we need her. She was looking at the same number I'd looked at 12 hours earlier. She saw a safety net. I had seen a lever. By Monday, she'd learn the difference. I opened the yellow envelope at 8 o'clock Friday morning, 6 years after I'd sealed it. 3 years after I started checking it every week, and one day after I finally knew why I'd left it for myself. The red wax cracked cleanly under my letter opener. Inside 3 items exactly where I'd placed them in 2017 when Curtis and Ariadne bought their house and asked us for help with the down payment. First, a promissory note printed on legal paper signed by all 3 of us. Borrower Curtis James Lancaster. Lender Hazel Marie Lancaster and Conrad Edward Lancaster jointly. Principal amount $132,500. Terms: due upon demand with 90 days written notice. I remembered the closing. Curtis had been so grateful, so eager. He'd signed without reading, too thrilled about the house, too trusting that everything his parents gave was a gift. Conrad had signed too proud to help his son, never imagining the words "upon demand" would ever matter. I'd insisted on those words. My lawyer had drafted them at my request, and Conrad had looked at me strangely when I'd explained I wanted legal documentation even for family loans. It protects everyone, I'd told him. Clear terms prevent misunderstandings. I hadn't said what I was really thinking, that paper lasts longer than gratitude. Second, a demand letter, pre-drafted blank spaces for signature and date. Professional letterhead from my attorney's office. Formal language about contractual obligations and payment terms. Everything ready except my signature and the date. I'd prepared this the same week as the loan closing, filed it away, and told myself I'd never need it. But I'd checked it every Saturday for 3 years just to make sure it was still there, still waiting. Third, a note I'd written to myself on plain stationery dated April 2017. Just one line in my own handwriting. If you're reading this, you already know what to do. Trust the paperwork. My eyes welled up for the first time since the funeral 6 years ago. Not for Conrad, who'd taught me to document everything. For myself, 6 years younger, careful enough to prepare for betrayal I'd hoped would never come. I set the note aside and picked up the demand letter. In my desk drawer, I kept the Silver Cross ballpoint pen Conrad and I had used to sign our first mortgage in 1985. I pulled it out, now felt its weight in my hand, heavier than it should be, the way significant things always are. Conrad had bought this pen the day we closed on our first house, a small ranch in a decent neighborhood, stretching ourselves thin on a 30-year note we'd paid off in 18. We'd used it for everything that mattered after that: business contracts, the deed to our second house, the articles of incorporation for Lancaster Regional Logistics, the sale papers when we'd finally sold the company. Document everything, Conrad used to say, usually while filing something I thought was trivial, especially in family. Not because you don't trust them, because memory is unreliable and paper is permanent. If you've ever signed something without reading it, because you trusted the person handing you the pen, you understand why paperwork exists. I signed the demand letter with a steady hand. Dated it November 29th, 2023. Filled in the principal amount, $132,500. Filled in the notice period 90 days from receipt. Slid the letter and the promissory note into a manila envelope addressed to Curtis and Ariadne Lancaster. Added a certified mail slip. Set it by the door for the post office Monday morning. Some pens carry weight. This one carried 38 years of building something from nothing, and the understanding that some things, the most important things, must be written down. Monday evening, Vernon called me. "I spoke to Curtis this morning," he said without preamble, "after he tried to unfreeze your account at the bank." And I said, "Rebecca Talbot at First Tennessee explained that primary account holders can't be overridden by secondary holders." He sat in his car in the parking lot for 20 minutes. Then he called me. Vernon's voice was tired, the kind of tired that comes from delivering hard truths to people who don't want to hear them. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him what happened Thursday wasn't a miscommunication," Vernon said. "It was a declaration. He declared you didn't matter." I closed my eyes. "He tried to defend it," Vernon continued. "Said it was about fairness, about Ariadne's seating plan, about family balance with Norma there." I let him finish. Then I asked him, "Your mother built a company from 2 trucks. She buried her husband and kept living. She raised you alone after that, and she didn't earn a chair." Silence on the line. "He didn't have an answer," Vernon said. "So I gave him one. I told him when comfort outranks dignity, that isn't loyalty, that is cowardice." The word hung in the air between us. Some words don't argue back. They just sit there in the silence, waiting for you to realize they're true. "How did he respond?" I asked. "He didn't," Vernon said. "He searched for something to say, some way to reframe it, but cowardice is a hard word to argue with when it fits. I told him I wasn't calling to lecture him. I was calling because I watched you leave that house with your back straight and your eyes dry, and that should terrify him. Did it? I asked. I think so, Vernon said. I think he's starting to understand that you're not reacting. You're acting. There's a difference. There is, I said. Hazel, Vernon said carefully, what are you going to do? I already did it, I said. He'll find out Monday when he checks his mailbox. I hung up and imagined Curtis sitting in his car outside the bank, staring at his steering wheel, Vernon's word echoing in his head. Cowardice. Not a mistake. Not a misunderstanding. Not poor judgment or bad timing. Cowardice. Searching for a word to argue with and not finding one. By the time he got home Monday evening, there would be a white and blue certified mail slip waiting in his mailbox notification that something requiring his signature was waiting at the post office. 90 days to pay $132,500, or I'd foreclose on the house where they'd served Thanksgiving dinner with 14 chairs. Curtis found the certified mail slip Monday evening at 6:30, tucked between grocery store circulars and a gas bill. By 7, Vernon had called to tell me what happened next. Curtis walked into his kitchen around 9, Vernon said. Ariadne was stacking dishes. He said 5 words he'd never said to her before. This is your fault, too. I sat at my kitchen table, half-packed boxes around me, and listened to Vernon describe the fight that followed. Ariadne demanding Curtis fix the frozen account situation. Curtis firing back that she'd planned the seating chart she'd left me out. Ariadne defending her decision. I could have eaten in the kitchen, she said, as if that made it reasonable. Then Curtis did something I've never seen him do, Vernon said. He stood up, raised his voice, told Ariadne that you built a company that employed 300 people and you weren't eating in his kitchen. First time in years that Curtis had taken my side against his wife. But Vernon wasn't finished. Hazel, he said carefully, you need to know something. Conrad knew. Every step of Ariadne's campaign he knew. I closed my eyes. Vernon walked me through it. Year 1, 2018, when Ariadne removed me from the Brooks Lancaster family group chat, Conrad saw the notification on his phone. He said nothing. Year 2, when she forgot to invite me to events, and I'd asked Conrad why he'd made excuses covered for her. Years 3 and 4, when Ariadne established boundaries requiring advance notice for visits, Conrad had enforced them, told me I needed to respect Ariadne's needs. Year 5. This Thanksgiving, when Ariadne planned a table for 14, knowing 15 people would attend, Conrad had helped her set it. He wasn't just passive, he was complicit. If you've ever watched someone defend the indefensible because it was easier than admitting complicity, you know the silence that comes when they finally run out of excuses. Ariadne called Norma on speaker. Vernon continued. Put her on speakerphone right there in the kitchen. Told her Curtis was spiraling, needed his mother-in-law to talk sense into him. I could picture Norma's voice, sharp and certain the way it always was when she thought she was right. She told Curtis to man up, Vernon said. Said you'd come crawling back, that women like you always do. My jaw tightened. And Curtis, Vernon said, his voice quiet with something like pride, said no. Told Norma your name is Hazel and you're not crawling anywhere. I sat with that for a moment. Too little too late, but something. Thank you for telling me, I said finally. I hung up and looked at the boxes stacked against my living room wall. Dishes wrapped in newspaper. Books sorted into keep and donate piles. My life reduced to decisions about what fit in a moving truck to Seattle. Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Norma Garrison in her camel coat holding a bouquet of supermarket flowers, the cheap kind with the price sticker still visible on the cellophane. Gerald stood behind her, hands in his pockets, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. I opened the door. Hazel, Norma said, her voice dripping with manufactured warmth. This has gone far enough. You're tearing apart a family over a dinner seat. I stepped aside to let them in, gestured to the couch. Norma set the flowers on my coffee table like she was bestowing a gift. I walked to my file cabinet, the same one I'd been checking every Saturday for 3 years, and pulled out a document I'd prepared 18 months ago. Typed, formatted, printed on good paper. I set it on the coffee table next to her cheap flowers. Hazel Lancaster Total Family Financial Support, 2018 to 2023, $660,000, I said, reading the header. Norma Garrison, total contributions. Same period, $2,450. Norma's eyes dropped to the page. I watched her scan the breakdown. My side down payment on Curtis's house, $132,500. Monthly mortgage autopay, 60 months at $3,400. Emergency car repair fund, $8,000. Twins' education savings accounts, $25,000 each. Medical bill assistance when Ariadne's insurance lapsed, $4,200. New roof after the storm, $18,000. The rest in smaller amounts: groceries during tight months, gas money, kids' birthday parties, Christmas presents that cost more than a bottle of wine. Her side wine bottles, $90 each, brought to gatherings she didn't host. Birthday gifts averaging $45. Christmas presents, same. The occasional restaurant check she'd picked up when others were watching. Before I show you what happened when she saw those numbers, are you still with me? Comment. A, if you think Norma backed down, or B, if she doubled down, and tell me in 5 to 10 words why. Please note what follows includes some recreated details for storytelling purposes, but the arithmetic is what matters. You brought a bottle of wine to every gathering, Norma, I said, my voice calm. $90 bottles, if I remember correctly. Good taste. I brought the roof over their heads. Norma's mouth opened, closed, opened again. This is, she started. Accurate, I said. Every dollar documented, every contribution recorded. I have receipts in the file cabinet if you'd like to verify. Gerald shifted uncomfortably on the couch. $2,450 in 5 years, I continued. That's $41 a month. Less than a phone bill, less than a gym membership. $2,450. That's $50 a month, less than a phone bill. And you sat at the head of my son's table, I said. In the seat I'd occupied for 20 years, the seat I'd earned with $660,000 and 38 years of building something from nothing. Norma stared at the paper. Her perfectly applied lipstick had left a mark on her coffee cup. I'd served her coffee out of habit, the kind of hospitality you extend even to people who don't deserve it. Norma tried. You don't have to say anything, I said. The math says it for you. For the first time in 5 years, maybe the first time in her entire 65 years, Norma Garrison had absolutely nothing to say. She stood. Gerald stood with her. They left the flowers on my coffee table, $9.99, according to the sticker I could see through the cellophane. I closed the door behind them and looked at the balance sheet still sitting on the coffee table. $2,450, less than a monthly car payment. And she sat at the head of my son's table. The math, as always, was the math. The math had silenced Norma. But numbers, I've learned, speak louder after people leave than when they're standing in front of you. I sent the certified letter Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, Jake Renert called me. Jake Renert had been Curtis's college roommate sophomore year, now a real estate attorney in Nashville. I'd met him twice, once at Curtis's graduation, once at the wedding. He called my cell at 2:15, his voice careful, professional. "Mrs. Lancaster," he said, "I need to tell you what happened when your son received your demand letter yesterday." "Go ahead," I said. So he told me, and I listened. The mail carrier knocked at 9:07 Monday morning. Curtis signed for the white and blue envelope, saw the return address in my handwriting, precise, straight 40 years of meticulous record-keeping, visible in every letter, and Jake said he knew immediately the floor was about to drop. Curtis carried it inside, walked to his kitchen table, sat down in the exact chair where Norma Garrison had sat Thanksgiving night at the head of the table in his dining room. The same chair, the same table, built with my money. Jake said Curtis's hands weren't quite steady when he opened the envelope. Inside the promissory note and the demand letter professionally formatted on my attorney's letterhead. Curtis read it once, then twice, then a third time. Jake said like reading it again might change the words. Borrower Curtis James Lancaster, lender Hazel Marie Lancaster, principal $132,500, purpose down payment assistance, purchase of residential property, terms due upon demand with 90 days written notice. Curtis's signature at the bottom rushed and barely legible, the way he'd always sign things when he was excited. Report cards. He wanted me to see permission slips for field trips, the lease on his first apartment. Jake told me about the closing table 5 years ago. Curtis had been 33, buying his first real house, 4 bedrooms, a yard, a neighborhood with good schools. I'd handed him the pen, the same Silver Cross pen Conrad and I had used for our first mortgage 40 years earlier, and said, "Just sign here, son." Curtis signed without reading a single word. Too excited about the house, too certain that everything his mother did was a gift with no strings, too trusting that the paperwork didn't matter because family didn't hold family accountable. If you've ever signed something without reading it because you trusted the person handing you the pen, you know exactly the moment Curtis felt the air leave his lungs. He called me at 9:15, Jake said. Ariadne was reading over his shoulder. She grabbed the document, scanned it, and her voice started rising. "Can she do this? Can she actually do this?" Jake paused. What did Curtis say? I asked. He said, "It's a legal document. I signed it," Jake said. Then Ariadne asked where they were supposed to get $132,000 in 90 days. Curtis went quiet. Then he called me. I could picture it. Ariadne in her bathrobe, panic spreading across her face. Curtis sitting at that kitchen table, the same table where he'd served Thanksgiving dinner, with 14 chairs staring at a piece of paper that proved he'd built his entire life on a loan he'd forgotten was temporary. "I read it over the phone," Jake continued. "I confirmed it's a valid promissory note with a demand clause. If the terms are clear and the signature is authentic, the lender can call it in. It's legal. He'd need to pay or negotiate, or you could pursue collection." "What did he say?" I asked. "He asked if there was any way out of it," Jake said. "I told him not without your agreement. Then I asked him if he'd never read this before he signed it." Silence on the line. "He said he was 33 and his mother handed him the pen," Jake said quietly. "Like that was an explanation. Like that made it okay." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him his father wasn't here anymore," Jake said, "and his mother was the one holding the paper." I closed my eyes, heard the weight in Jake's voice, the recognition that this wasn't just a legal matter. This was a family breaking apart one document at a time. "Mrs. Lancaster," Jake said, "I'm calling because Curtis asked me to negotiate with you, to see if you'd accept partial payment or extend the timeline. But I told him I needed to call you first attorney to client and ask what you want me to tell him." "I want you to tell him the terms are clear," I said. 90 days from receipt, $132,500, no partial payment, no extensions." "He doesn't have it," Jake said. "He told me they have $6,800 in savings." "I know," I said. $132,500, 90 days, $6,800 in savings. The math was simple and absolute. "He could refinance," Jake said. "Pull equity out of the house, but that takes time and rates are high right now. Or he could ask family for help." "Norma contributed $2,400 over 5 years," I said. "I don't think she's in a position to help." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Lancaster," he said finally, "I have to ask, is there any scenario where you'd consider—" "No," I said. "The terms are the terms. He signed them. I'm enforcing them." "Understood," Jake said. "I'll let him know." "Jake," I said before he could hang up, "thank you for calling me first." "You're welcome," he said. "For what it's worth, I told Curtis that trusting someone doesn't exempt you from reading what you sign, especially when it's family, especially when it's money." I hung up and sat at my kitchen table surrounded by boxes labeled Seattle in black marker. Curtis was sitting in his kitchen 600 miles away, holding a piece of paper that proved trust wasn't the same as wisdom. His father wasn't here to hand him the pen anymore. I was the one holding the paper. And I was sitting in an apartment 600 miles away, packing boxes labeled Seattle, with no intention of ever handing him anything again. Curtis had 90 days to find money he didn't have. I had boxes to pack and a life in Seattle waiting 600 miles away. Ariadne showed up at my door Tuesday afternoon with a bouquet of daisies from the Kroger floral department and an apology she'd clearly rehearsed in the car. I saw her through the peephole before I opened the door. Designer jeans, camel-colored sweater, the daisies still wrapped in cellophane with a $6.99 price sticker visible on the plastic. I opened the door. "Hazel," she said, her voice warm and practiced, "I think we need to talk about this like adults." "I agree," I said. "Come in." I stepped aside. She walked into my living room and stopped. Boxes everywhere. Half my life already packed, labeled in black marker Seattle kitchen, Seattle office, Seattle books. The coffee table I'd had for 20 years surrounded by newspaper-wrapped dishes. My couch pushed against the wall to make room for the stacks. Ariadne's eyes moved across the room, her rehearsed expression cracking. "You're really moving," she said. "You're actually Seattle." "January 10th, I said. "The moving truck arrives January 8th. She set the daisies on the coffee table next to a box labeled Seattle. Photos, and sat down slowly like she was trying to find her balance. "Hazel," she began, pulling out the apology she'd practiced. "I'm sorry about Thanksgiving. The seating plan was just logistics. Things got out of hand. I never meant—" "Logistics," I said. She stopped. "Like when you removed me from the Brooks Lancaster family group chat," I continued. "Like when my birthday invitations got lost. Like when you established boundaries requiring advance notice for visits. Like when there were 14 plates for 15 people." I sat down across from her. "That isn't logistics, Ariadne," I said. "That's a campaign. If you've ever had someone apologize for hurting you while simultaneously asking you to fix what they broke, you know the exact temperature of the room when I said that word campaign." Ariadne's face went carefully blank, her attorney mask sliding into place. "I understand you're upset," she said, shifting tactics. But we need to talk about the account. We need it unfrozen. Curtis's mortgage payment. The account is mine, I said. My name is primary. Curtis's name was added for survivorship purposes only. If Curtis wants to discuss his debts, he can call me directly. Hazel, I won't discuss my son's debts with his wife, I said. This conversation is over. Ariadne stood, picked up her purse, left the daisies on my coffee table already starting to wilt in their cellophane wrapper. I closed the door behind her and looked at the flowers. $6.99 to negotiate over $660,000 in frozen assets and $132,000 in outstanding debt. She still didn't understand the stakes. That night, Vernon called. I need to tell you something, he said. About Curtis. Go ahead. Wednesday night after Ariadne came home from your place, Curtis was alone in his office, Vernon said. Kids were asleep. Ariadne was in the bedroom. And for the first time in his life, Curtis Googled your name. I said nothing. He told me this morning, Vernon continued. Called me, said he needed to talk. He typed Hazel Lancaster Memphis Logistics into Google and hit enter. Vernon described what Curtis found. Memphis Business Journal feature article from 2019. Lancaster Regional Logistics, from 2 trucks to 300 Hazel Lancaster on 35 years of quiet building. A photo of me standing in a warehouse doorway, row of blue trucks behind me, smiling naturally. Not the forced smile from family photos. The real one. The article detailed what I'd built. 340 trucks at peak operation, 4 warehouses across Tennessee, 200 employees, the Outstanding Tennessee Entrepreneur Award I'd received in 2019 and never mentioned to anyone. He said he'd never Googled you before, Vernon told me. 51 years old, and he'd never once looked up who his mother was. I closed my eyes. Then he found the other article, Vernon said quietly. The Lancaster Family Education Fund. I'd established the fund 3 years after selling the company. 47 scholarships awarded in the first 3 years, each one funding a full semester at community college for students who couldn't afford it. I'd named it after my late husband, the man who'd taught me that documentation mattered, and systems lasted longer than memory. Curtis didn't know it existed, Vernon said. Nobody in your family knew. You awarded 47 scholarships and never told them. It wasn't their business, I said. Hazel, Vernon said gently. He called me this morning and cried, said he'd built his whole life on your money and never asked a single question about who you were, never looked, never wondered, just took. 47 strangers got to college because of me. Curtis couldn't name one of them, couldn't name the fund, couldn't tell you I'd built something beautiful in his father's name. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him it was too late for revelation to substitute for respect, Vernon said. That discovering who you are now doesn't erase 5 years of forgetting you mattered. Thank you, I said. He asked if I thought you'd forgive him, Vernon said. I told him forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation, that you might forgive what he did, but you don't owe him access to who you are. I hung up and sat in my half-packed living room, surrounded by boxes labeled for a city where nobody knew my name yet, where nobody would Google me and discover who I'd been, where I could be Hazel Lancaster, healthcare consultant, 68 years old, starting over. Curtis had sat in his office Wednesday night and Googled my name for the first time. Found the awards, found the scholarships, found a person he'd never bothered to know. 47 scholarships in the name of a man he'd only ever thought of as dad, awarded by a woman he'd told couldn't earn a chair at his table. And tomorrow Jake Renert would call him with worse news. Jake Renert would call Curtis with worse news Thursday morning. But first, my estate attorney called me. Michael Grant had been handling my estate planning for 12 years, partner at Grant & Associates, the kind of lawyer who returned calls within the hour and never left a detail unfinished. Hazel, he said when I answered. I wanted to let you know I spoke with Jake Renert this morning. Curtis was in his office trying to find a way out of the promissory note. And I said, there isn't one, Michael said. Jake reviewed the document. It's valid under the Uniform Commercial Code Article 3. Signed, witnessed, notarized. The terms are clear. Curtis has no legal grounds to challenge it. I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by boxes labeled Seattle and waited. Curtis asked if he could fight it. Michael continued. Jake told him the only question a court would ask is whether Curtis understood what he was signing. And that's not a question Curtis wants to answer under oath. No, I said quietly, it's not. I also authorized Jake to inform Curtis about the trust, Michael said. I thought it was better he hear it from his own attorney than discover it later. The trust. The document Michael and I had been working on for 3 years, since 2020, long before last Thanksgiving's 14 chairs. What did Jake tell him? I asked. That you've transferred all your assets into a revocable living trust, Michael said. Direct beneficiaries are Curtis's children, education funds, startup capital for when they're adults. The wealth passes directly to them, bypassing Curtis entirely. I heard Michael's pen clicking on the other end of the line, his thinking sound. Curtis's name doesn't appear anywhere as a beneficiary, Michael continued. The assets can't be touched by his creditors, can't be leveraged for his debts, can't pass through his hands. How did he respond? I asked. Jake said he went very quiet, Michael said. Then asked when you'd set this up. Jake told him you've been working on the estate plan for 3 years. 3 years. Since before the group chat removal, before the forgotten birthday, before the boundaries and the 14 chairs. If you've ever asked a lawyer, can I fight this, and watch them pause before answering, you know the pause is the answer. That means Curtis had started according to Michael. It means your mother wasn't reacting to Thanksgiving, Jake had told him. She was preparing for something she saw coming. Michael cleared his throat. Hazel, I want to make sure you understand what this means for Curtis, he said. He has 90 days to come up with $132,500. If he can't pay, you can pursue collection. That likely means foreclosure on the house. I understand, I said. And you're certain about the trust structure? Michael asked. Once you pass, everything goes to the grandchildren, nothing to Curtis. It's irrevocable in practice, even if the trust document is technically revocable. I'm certain, I said. All right, Michael said. I'll keep you updated if Jake reaches out again. I hung up and imagined Curtis in Jake's office the moment he understood that not only was the debt enforceable, but the inheritance he'd been counting on, the safety net he'd assumed would always be there, was gone. Later that day, Wanda called. Vernon talked to Curtis, she said without preamble. He's doing the math. What math? I asked, though I knew. The math of his life without you, Wanda said. Sat down Friday afternoon with a calculator and bank statements. First time he's ever calculated his finances without your safety net beneath him. Wanda had gotten the details from Vernon, who'd stopped by Curtis's house and found him at the kitchen table, papers spread everywhere. Personal savings, $6,850. Monthly mortgage payment, $3,400. 2 car payments totaling $780. Credit cards nearly maxed from Thanksgiving guests and early Christmas shopping. Health insurance, preschool tuition for twins, groceries, utilities. The calculator gave the same answer every time Vernon watched him punch in the numbers, 2 months maximum before complete financial collapse. Regional sales director, Wanda said. $40,000 salary, company car, and he built nothing on his own. What did Vernon tell him? I asked. Nothing, Wanda said. Just watched him do the math. But Ariadne was there. She told Curtis to ask Norma and Gerald for help. I waited. Curtis said no, Wanda continued. Ariadne asked, why not they have money? And Curtis looked up from his calculator and said, because your mother contributed $2,450 in 5 years. She's not our safety net. She never was. First time Curtis had weaponized my numbers. First time he'd used the math against Ariadne instead of against me. $6,850 in savings, $132,500 in debt due in 90 days, 2 months until eviction. The math was simple and absolute. Wanda, I said, do you think I'm being cruel? She was quiet for a long moment. I think you're being exactly as generous as they taught you to be, she said finally. You gave Curtis a house, a safety net, 5 years of financial security, and 47 strangers a college education. And he gave you 14 chairs. The math is the math, I said. Yes, Wanda said, it is. I hung up and looked at the boxes around me. Seattle, kitchen. Seattle, office. Seattle, books. Curtis had $6,850 in personal savings. A man who'd floated on a $528,000 safety net for 5 years had managed to save $6,850 on his own. And he told the woman who built that safety net that she hadn't contributed enough to earn a chair at his table. The irony would have been funny if it weren't about to destroy his life. Curtis had $6,800 saved and 2 months until collapse. Vernon called me 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. I need to tell you something about Ariadne, he said. He'd stopped by their house late. Curtis was gone and Ariadne was eating leftover turkey alone at the oak dining table I'd helped them choose. Vernon watched her run her hand along the wood grain, crying quietly. All the fancy place settings were put away. Then Ariadne walked to the garage, fetched the folding chair, and placed it at the far end of the table. She set a plate, a fork, and a napkin folded exactly how I'd taught her. 15 place settings, the 15th chair empty. 15 seats, 1 person. That's what too late looks like, Vernon said. He was standing in the doorway unseen, proving her regret was real, not a performance. Mid-December moving day, Curtis knocked on my door. He walked into my empty condo, looking older than 51, surrounded by nail holes and carpet indentations. He tried to minimize Thanksgiving, blaming miscommunication. I let him finish. "Let me tell you what happened," I said. "You stood in a room where I helped pick the table in a house I helped you buy, and you let your wife tell your mother she had no place at your table." Curtis sat on a packing box and buried his face in his hands. I gave him 4 non-negotiable conditions: family counseling with a therapist. I choose my move to Seattle, the promissory note, demands suspended but not forgiven, and the Children's Education Fund remaining strictly in my name. Curtis nodded. Then he asked, "Mom, if you didn't have the money, would you still be leaving?" "Yes," I said. "A chair was never about money." Then he asked, his voice breaking, "If I didn't have any money, would you have kept me?" I didn't answer. The silence stretched. Curtis looked at my face and understood. Our relationship had become transactional, him taking the money, me giving it, instead of demanding respect. "The casserole," he said quietly. Nobody ate it. It sat on my passenger seat the whole drive home, smelling of Dad's recipe. I threw it away the next morning. We all knew why. The moving truck engine started outside. "Mom, I can't fix this, can I?" he asked. "No," I said. "Can I try?" "Counseling starts in February," I replied. "Tuesdays at 4 via video calls from Seattle. Miss 1 session and we're done." "I'll be there," he said. He stopped at the door. "The scholarship fund you set up in Dad's name. Vernon told me 47 strangers got college money while I got a house. Somehow they ended up with more than I did." "Yes," I said, "they did. Task 6.2. Curtis left. The movers finished loading the last box 20 minutes later. I sat on the front steps of my condo one final time, and Wanda Frost sat down beside me without saying a word. The moving truck idled at the curb as the December cold settled in. Wanda handed me a disposable gas station coffee cup. We sat in silence for 2 minutes, watching the light fade over suburban Memphis, the neighborhood where I'd lived for 6 years after selling my logistics company, the condo where I'd checked that file cabinet every Saturday. "You okay?" Wanda asked finally. I looked at the empty condo behind us, seeing nail holes and carpet indentations. "Not yet," I said, but I will be." My phone rang. "Vernon Prescott," I answered, putting him on speaker. "Hazel," Vernon said, his voice careful. "I've been planning this call for 2 weeks. I wanted to wait until today, until you were actually leaving." He then recounted Thanksgiving dinner detail by detail with exact timestamps. 3:50 p.m. I arrived with the casserole. 4:05 p.m. I counted 14 plates for 15 people. 4:15 p.m. dinner was called. 4:17 p.m. Ariadne made her statement about boundaries and kitchen seating. 4:18 p.m. Norma took my seat at the head of the table. 4:19 p.m. Vernon stopped eating. 4:20 p.m. I buttoned my coat. 4:21 p.m. The door clicked shut behind me. "I told you I'd remember everything," Vernon said. "I witnessed it. Every second." Those timestamps mattered. They proved I hadn't imagined it. "Thank you for seeing it," I said. Vernon continued. "I've seen anger and tears at holiday tables, but the most frightening thing that night was that you left in silence. A woman who yells can be argued with, but a woman who leaves quietly has already decided. There's no negotiating with that." I touched my watch. "Vernon, I decided 3 years ago. Thanksgiving was just the day I chose to act." 3 years since 2020, since I started checking the file cabinet, working on trust documents, and preparing for the day my family would erase me. "Hazel," Vernon said gently, "your husband would be proud." "I know," I said. The truck driver handed me the paperwork for Seattle, Washington. I signed and the engine rumbled. "Drive safe," Vernon said, hanging up. I stood up, feeling 68 years in my knees, but something lighter in my chest. Wanda stood too, pulling me into a long hug. Her eyes were wet. Mine weren't. "Call me when you get there," she said. I picked up my purse, took my condo keys, and left them on the concrete step. I didn't lock the door, letting the December air move through the empty rooms. I walked to my Honda, got in, and started the engine. I looked back at the open door and Wanda one last time. Just once. Then I looked at the road ahead. I drove for 3 days, stopping twice at roadside motels with thin walls and good coffee crossing state lines without looking back. 3 weeks after leaving Memphis, I woke up in a Seattle apartment 18 floors above Puget Sound. For the first time in 6 years, I reached for my late husband's mug out of gratitude, not grief. I unpacked it from the kitchen fragile box, washed it, and placed it on the windowsill where the sunrise hit. It wasn't hidden in a cabinet anymore. It was displayed where the light caught it. He had taught me that systems outlast memory and to prepare for the unexpected. He went wherever I went, not as weight, but as foundation. Seattle stretched out below me, and I remembered how to breathe. My first day at the consulting firm started at 8 on the 23rd floor. Glass walls, open floor plan, and a team of 8 people under 40, all slightly intimidated by a 68-year-old woman who read logistics reports faster than they could write them. By lunch, I'd identified 4 supply chain inefficiencies. I remembered something I'd forgotten. I was excellent at building things and solving unsolvable problems. During lunch, my phone rang. Curtis. "Mom," he said, "I enrolled in counseling. First session is next Tuesday. Ariadne got a part-time job in event planning." There was silence. Then he added, "Mom, I'm sorry." 3 words. Genuine accountability, not conditional regret. "I know," I said. "Keep going." The promissory note demand remained suspended, waiting for sustained action. I hung up looking at the city. My city now, where I was Hazel Lancaster consultant, not someone edited out of a family chat. 1 year later, Thanksgiving 2024, I sat in a restaurant overlooking Puget Sound with my consulting team colleagues who had become friends. My phone buzzed with a photo from Curtis. It showed the oak dining table I'd helped him choose. 15 chairs were arranged around it, including the folding one from the garage. At that 15th chair sat a small white card with black handwriting, Mom. Not Hazel, not grandmother, just Mom. The relationship reclaimed without qualifiers. I replied, "Happy Thanksgiving, Curtis. Save me a seat next year. Maybe I'd go, maybe I wouldn't, but the invitation mattered." I set my phone down and looked at my table. Sarah from operations raised her glass. "Hazel, happy Thanksgiving. Thank you for fixing everything we break." Everyone laughed and raised their glasses. I took a bite of pumpkin pie, the kind my husband used to make from scratch. 68 years old, new city, new job, and a table of people who saw me clearly. What nobody tells you is how good it feels to finally stand on your own, building a foundation that doesn't depend on anyone remembering to include you. My phone buzzed with a text from Wanda. "Happy Thanksgiving, proud of you." I smiled, inviting her to visit in the spring. I set the phone down, took another bite of pie, and tasted only gratitude. The journey north had been a calculated escape, a deliberate uncoupling from years of quiet erasure. When the highway finally dissolved into the rainy grids of Seattle, I felt the phantom ache of Tennessee begin to recede. My new apartment smelled of fresh paint and cedar, a blank slate suspended between the gray sky and the deep blue water. As I watched the ferry boats trace white lines across the sound, I realized the silence around me wasn't empty. It was spacious. It was room to move. At the office, my age became my armor rather than an expiration date. The 20-somethings moved with a frantic, caffeinated energy, but I possessed the quiet confidence of someone who had survived worse than a missed quarterly projection. I streamlined their chaotic distribution models with a few strokes of a red pen, earning a quiet reverence that felt far better than pity. I wasn't just surviving an ending. I was engineering a spectacular second act, relying on the sharp analytical mind that had always been my quietest strength. The emotional distance from Memphis allowed a delicate renegotiation of terms with my past. Curtis's apology hadn't fixed the fractures overnight, but it provided a solid, honest blueprint for reconstruction. By refusing to rescue him or settle for cheap sentimentality, I had given him the space to actually grow. The empty chair at his holiday table wasn't a symbol of lingering abandonment anymore. It was a respectful, open invitation. I was no longer a ghost haunting the periphery of their lives, but a woman anchoring her own universe. As the holiday dinner drew to a close and the city lights began to blink open across the dark water, I looked around the restaurant table at these new companions. They knew nothing of my old scars or the family politics that had nearly sidelined me. They only knew Hazel, the architect of efficiency, the woman who stabilized their shaking ground. The pumpkin pie sweetness lingered a gentle nod to a love that had ended too soon but left behind a permanent, indestructible scaffolding. I had successfully crossed my own wilderness, built a new home from scratch, and discovered that the view from the top of my own life was absolutely magnificent. And to you listening to my story, remember this. For years, I made the mistake of confusing silence with peace. I told myself that keeping quiet about the small slights, the forgotten invitations, the gradual erasure that was being the bigger person. But silence isn't strength when it teaches people you don't matter. Don't make my mistake. Don't wait for 14 chairs to realize you've been standing on a floor that stopped holding you years ago. These revenge stories with Mom aren't really about revenge at all. They're about finally seeing your worth when everyone else forgot to look. The family drama that unfolds when you stand up isn't proof you were wrong. It's proof you were right all along. I believe God put me through this to teach me that being someone's safety net doesn't mean letting them stand on your back. The scholarship fund, the documentation, the quiet preparation, those weren't revenge. They were self-respect finally finding its voice. If my story resonated with you, please drop a comment below. What would you have done differently? And if you know someone navigating their own family drama, share this with them. Sometimes we need to hear, "We're not alone." Subscribe to Silent Revenge with Auntie May for more revenge stories with Mom who found their strength. Your support means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. As a reminder, some details in this story have been fictionalized to protect privacy and emphasize the lesson. What matters is the message: you are not the floor. You never were.